I want to discuss what's going on in Libya, a country that is in the northern tier of the continent of Africa. Some of you may know or may not know that there is a slave trade going on in the country of Libya. Now, I have a few news sources that I'm using, okay? And I'm going to list each article in the description box below, okay? So, first things first, I have time.com, okay? And I have The Root, and I have Al Jazeera. Those are the three sites that I'm getting information from. And there's countless other resources, news articles, and information about what's going on in Libya right now. So first off, there is video footage, photography footage of human beings being sold for $400 per human, per person. Okay? And this footage was, an investigation conducted from CNN last month, showing what's going on with the Libya slave trade. Okay, an estimated 400 million people. Okay, detention centers and everything are overrun right now in Libya. There's a lot going on. Okay. I'm going to read some information. A video of a man appearing to be sold at an auction in Libya for $400 has shocked the world and focused international attention on the exploitation of migrants and refugees, the North African country. The footage and subsequent investigation conducted by CNN last month has rallied European and African leaders to take action to stop the abuses. On Wednesday, the leaders of Libya, France, Germany, Chad, and Niger, and four other countries agreed on a plan to evacuate thousands of migrants stuck in Libyan detention camps. The grainy undercover video appears to show smugglers selling off a dozen men outside of the capital city, Tripoli. Does anybody need a digger? This is a digger, a big strong man, he'll dig, said an auctioneer, according to CNN. What am I bid? What am I bid? The report has drawn attention to an issue that aid and migrant groups says has gone on for years. Okay? So again, this information, the photography, the video footage, we're just now seeing it. It's just now being pushed in the Western European, Western civilization, the USA. But this is an issue that has been going on for years. Why is there a slave trade in Libya? Libya is the main transit point for refugees and migrants trying to reach Europe by sea. In each of the last 3 years, 150,000 people have made the dangerous crossing across the Mediterranean Sea from Libya. For 4 years in a row, 3,000 refugees have died while attempting the journey, according to figures from the International Organization for Migration, IOM, the UN's migration agency. The Libyan Coast Guard, supported with funds and resources from the EU, and more specifically Italy, has cracked down on both smuggling refugees and migrants to Europe. With estimates of 400,000 to almost 1 million people now bottled up in Libya, detention centers are overrun, and there are mounting reports of robbery, rape, and murder among migrants. According to a September report by the UN Human Rights Agency, conditions in the centers have been described as horrific, and among other abuses, migrants are vulnerable to being sold off as laborers in slave auctions. Again, this has been going on for years. It's a total extortion machine. Leonard Doyle, Director of Media and Communications for the International Organization for Migration in Geneva, tells Time, fueled by the absolute rush of migrants through Libya, thinking they can get out of poverty, following a dream that doesn't exist. Again, the International Organization for Migration said in April that it had documented reports of slave markets along the migrant routes in North Africa, tormenting hundreds of young African men bound for Libya. So this was back in April when the International Organization for Migration, which is the UN's United Nations Migration Agency, reported this in April. Again, this information wasn't brought to Western civilization, USA, attention, okay, in the media, to the mainstream popular until November of 2017, last month. But yet there was a report from April. And then again, this has been going on for years. They become commodities to be sold and discarded when they have no more value, Doyle said in an April statement. And there's gonna be pictures showing you throughout this video of what is going on. How is Libya handling the crisis? According to CNN, the UN-backed Libyan government has launched a formal investigation into the allegations, but Libya is largely considered a failed state since Moammar Qaddafi, who ran the country for 4 decades, was ousted in 2011. The country has descended into civil war. A transitional government failed to implement rule of law in the country, which has splintered into several factions of militias, tribes, and gangs. In lawless Libya, many see the slave trade and smuggling as a lucrative industry. Tackling the country's humanitarian crisis will require international assistance. On Wednesday, Libya reached a deal with the European Union, EU, and African leaders to allow the emergency reparation of refugees and migrants facing abuse in its detention centers. The government also agreed to open a transit center for vulnerable refugees after months of negotiations, according to Reuters. The center is intended to safely house people before they are resettled or sent to a third country. I'm going to leave links, again, to this information in the description box below. But let's go back to 2011, which is 6 years ago. Okay, again, this has been going on for years. Let's go back to 2011. Moammar Qaddafi was pretty much controlling and ruling the country of Libya for 4 decades, since the late 60s all the way to 2011. Okay, he was a military commander-in-chief. He really, in my opinion, he advocated for Pan-Africanism. Other people saw Moammar Qaddafi as a dictator, and cruel and unusual and violent. But I personally saw him as a Pan-Africanist, okay? And I'll leave a description of a definition of what Pan-African means in a description box. But back to 2011, Moammar Qaddafi, not only was he ousted out of the government, but he was assassinated. And this was all set up by who? The U.S. government, the United States of America government. And if we recall 6 years ago, who was the president? President Barack Obama, who happens to be a Democrat. And who was the Secretary of State? Remember the whole Benghazi situation? Who was that? Oh, that's right. Madam Secretary Hillary Rodham Clinton. Okay, that was 6 years ago. And it just proves, again, unfortunately, the U.S. government is always meddling in other countries' situations, and in many times causes problems, disasters. And then when the disaster happens, then they want to sit around and point the finger when once again it was the U.S. government who initiated all of this mayhem. Okay, let's go to theroot.com. Again, all of these links will be in the description box below. How Obama's worst mistake led to the Libyan slave trade. Okay, when CNN broke the story several weeks ago that slavery, not wage slavery, not emotional slavery, not virtual slavery, but actual whips and chains forced labor slavery was alive and well in the North African nation of Libya, Americans finally started to take notice, sort of. While there has been some reporting on the issue and a few statements from government leaders across the world, there has not been a sustained political and social media effort to address the Libyan slave trade akin to the 2014 Bring Back Our Girls campaign for the kidnapping victims of Boko Haram in Nigeria, or even the well-intentioned but poorly conceived Kony 2012 campaign. Perhaps because the African slavery issue is stickier, more pervasive, and worst of all, involves the United States of America. Again, now granted, before I even continue reading, I'll give you some background about me. I have spent the past 6 years going into student loan debt to get college degrees, right? I am a sociologist by education. My undergrad degree, Bachelor of Sociology with a minor in substance abuse treatment. My master's degree, Social Sciences with a concentration on women and gender studies, as well as U.S. history and politics. So again, I study this. And I'm not saying that I'm an expert or I know everything. What I'm saying is I have a background in this information. This is geopolitics at its best. This is history at its best. History has a way of repeating itself. And again, time and time again, the United States of America is literally dibbing and dabbing in other countries' issues. They create dictators that they want, then they assassinate dictators they dislike or doesn't want to go with their plan anymore, and then they get rid of them, and then they create another coup so they can create another dictator. This is what the U.S. has been doing for centuries, okay? At least 200 years, okay? This is their way of controlling everybody, everything. And once again, this is all about land, infrastructure, wealth, resources, okay? This is power. This is what power is. But let's continue, okay? The Root spoke to criminal defense attorney and asylum expert Yodit Tiwaldi, who is also a legal analyst for CNN, Fox, and TV One, about what is really happening in Libya right now and what responsibility African Americans really have in the current crisis. Yodit Tawada was raised in Dallas, but her family is from Eritrea, and she has firsthand experience with the African slave trade long before it became a late 2017 story. People act like this is new. This has been going on for years, she said over the phone, holding back frustration and emotion. Again, this has been going on for years, okay? Thousands of refugees, primarily from the countries of Eritrea and Sudan, are fleeing poverty and violence in their own countries, only to end up the victims of smugglers and traders at major ports in Libya. The men and women fleeing these countries are taking a substantial risk. They pay large sums of money to smugglers. They may have to travel long and unsafe distances. Physical violence and torture are almost expected. Smugglers have been known to force girls to take contraceptives before the journey, since it is expected that they will be raped multiple times during the trip. I'm going to read that again. Smugglers have been known to force young girls to take contraceptives before the journey, since it is expected that they will be raped multiple times during the trip. This has been going on for years. Libya is the only transit point to the Mediterranean to get to Europe. African refugees, used to go to Israel, but now that country is blocking them out, so they are forced to go through Libya to Europe. Again, Libya is a country in North Africa. Okay, again, Libya is a country in the northern part of Africa. Africa is a continent. Politically, African asylum seekers have been a hot topic for the conservative government in Israel for years. Advocates in Israel say that it is the peak of hypocrisy for a nation funded by refugees from the Holocaust to deny asylum to those in suffering. Meanwhile, starting around 2015, the government of Benjamin Netanyahu has given asylum seekers one of the three choices: stay in a refugee camp forever, go back home, or take $3,500 and a one-way ticket to anywhere but Israel. With Israel no longer an option, many asylum seekers have to take a more dangerous route, like traveling from Eritrea to Ethiopia to Sudan across the Sahara into Libya. That is the route that 4 of her cousins took to flee the chaos in Eritrea, and how they were caught in the Libyan slave trade. People make deals with smugglers. My cousin was assured that he'd be safe. The problem is these smugglers sell them to someone else. You're lucky if you aren't sold 3 or 4 times. A lot of times you're kidnapped or tortured. Sexual exploitation is a given. Okay? Tawade's cousins were kidnapped by slave traders in Libya and were forced to make ransom calls to family members all over the world. The choice was simple: pay the money or your family member will be sold into slavery. He made a call to us. When these kidnappers and smugglers found out you have family, especially in America, they will make a ransom call. Tawadi said, if you pay the money, they may release them, they may not. Some had to ask for as little as $1,000. Her youngest cousin, who was only 16 years old at the time, called Tawaldi's family in Dallas asking for $5,000 to save his life. When her family hesitated, the slavers broke her cousin's arm and forced him to call again. Her family paid the $5,000, hoping for the best. 2 of her cousins were released and made their way to Europe. 2 were supposedly sent back to Sudan, but no one has heard from them in 5 years. Again, I'm going to leave links to this article in the description box below. But here we are. We have a lot of anti-blackness going on. And anti-blackness is a part of white supremacy. And white supremacy and racism and anti-blackness work together to subjugate, discriminate, and disadvantage, and marginalize, and torture people with darker pigmentation, people that are black, people that are brown, but specifically black. The darker the skin complexion, the worse the treatment. Because if you notice, the people, again, they're coming from Eritrea, they're coming from Sudan, and they're crossing into Libya, crossing the Sahara Desert to get to Libya. Again, geography would really help a lot of people, because till this day, there are people who think Africa is a country and it's a continent. A lot of people still don't know where Libya is. It's North Africa. Don't know where the Mediterranean Sea is. And so geography really helps. Again, this is geopolitical, okay? But the anti-blackness is worldwide. White supremacy is worldwide, okay? You have people fleeing their countries because of poverty and crime and suffering, going to other countries with the assumption that there's going to be opportunity, upward mobility, safety, resources, and instead they're ending up in a slave trade. And we have to ask ourselves, why is Eritrea and Sudan and such, why are they having so many issues in those countries? Why are they having issues in Libya? Why are they having issues in Mexico? Why are they having issues, in the Caribbeans? And basically, anytime you see an issue going on in a country, and you see mass refugees and immigration and migration and migrants, it always goes back to who? The United States of America and Europe. Again, these countries, the United States of America and countries in Europe, because Europe is also a continent. But these predominantly white-controlled countries are the reasons why we have such mayhem in the continent of Africa in various countries. What's going on in Mexico? What's going on in the Caribbean islands? What's going on in South America? Central America? When you see these things, it always goes back to the USA and European countries. Okay? Now we're going to go to Al Jazeera. Migrants for sale, slave trade in Libya. Again, these links will be left in the description box. Please click on them. Please become informed so we can know what we're doing, what we're dealing with, what is going on, so we can take action. We need action steps, okay? So, migrants for sale, slave trade in Libya. African refugees have long used Libya as a gateway to Europe, but many are now facing abuse and exploitation and trafficking. So you can call this human trafficking, you can call it sex trafficking, you can call it labor trafficking, but many of us are going to call it slavery. Libya's UN-backed government says it's investigating allegations, again, of hundreds of African refugees and migrants passing through Libya are being bought and sold into modern-day slave markets, okay? According to reports, the trade works by preying on the tens of thousands of vulnerable people who risk everything to get to Libya's coast and then across the Mediterranean into Europe. And if you don't know what the Mediterranean is, because we have been using that term, the Mediterranean Sea, it is the sea, okay? It is the sea between, because you have the Mediterranean, you have Africa, the northern east coast of Africa, and then you have the Mediterranean Sea, you have what has been called the Middle East, and then you have Europe and Asia, okay? Again, geography matters. We need to make sure that we teach that in our schools, okay? Anyways, Libya is the main gateway for people attempting to reach Europe by sea, with more than 150,000 people making the crossing in each of the past 3 years. Again, this has been going on for years. The refugees are from several African countries, and they say they have fled war, poverty, and unemployment in their countries. Again, when you see this going on, it always goes back to the United States and European countries. They have taken a tough journey through the desert, and they have paid people, smugglers, to get to Libya to try to cross the Mediterranean to Europe. With the security and financial collapse in Libya, again, 6 years ago, the United States, President Barack Obama and his administration, Madam Secretary Hillary Clinton, okay, that was their whole issue 6 years ago. Keep that in mind. With the security and financial collapse in Libya, human trafficking and smuggling have become a booming trade, okay? There is no proper registration process for tens of thousands of refugees arriving in Libya. According to reports, the business of detention centers is unsupervised in some parts of Libya, and stories of torture, rape, and forced labor have emerged. When the centers get too overcrowded, people are then allegedly sold off like goods in an open market. Survivors have told the United Nations Migration Agency, okay, that they use smartphones to connect with people, smugglers, to get them to Libya's coast, and that they were then sold, being held for ransom, used as forced labor, or for sexual exploitation. And when we say sexual exploitation, understand we are talking about rape, forced sexual activity, forced, coerced rape, okay? The International Organization for Migration, which is the United Nations Migration Agency, says trade in humans has become so normalized that people are being bought and sold in public for as little as $400. As shocking as it seems, it is indeed true, okay? Leonard Doyle, okay? Remember I brought him up earlier from the time. He is he is a representative from the International Organization for Migration. The reason slave trade can happen is because there is really no rule of law across much of Libya. Again, remember, Moammar Qaddafi, ousted from Libya's government, assassinated. Again, President Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, United States of America. Keep that in mind. I'm going to keep saying that because people are always, oh my God, how is this happening? It always goes back to the United States and European countries. And get this, again, Libya. All right? Because I really want people to understand. Libya is a country as big as France with a lot of space there. Migrants are coming there. They see the promise of a new life when they go to their Facebook feed and they think something wonderful is waiting for them in Europe because a smuggler has abused the system and has sold them a lie. This is also very similar to the United States because people have a view that we can go to the USA and we can go to European countries and we're going to have wealth, we're going to have healthcare, we're going to have peace and happiness, we're going to have opportunities. And then I live in the USA, and I'm here to tell you that is not the case. Okay, here it is. I am a U.S. citizen. I live in Flint, Michigan, and we still don't have access to clean drinking water. People are living in poverty. There is crime and violence. People are suffering. There is systematic oppression, racism, sexism, homophobia, classism, transphobia. There are major issues here and in European countries. But again, the facade has always been, if we could just get to the USA, if we could just get to a European country, everything will be okay. And then nobody is looking at the fact that the USA and European countries have created the disasters that are going on in the world. Okay, in various countries and various continents, they have created the problem. But again, we sit back and we allow the powers that be to divide and conquer us. But back to the situation. They get off the bus and they are quickly put into a kind of murder machine, an extortion machine. They are robbed of their possessions. Their families are called. They are forced. They are tortured. They give them money, and then they are sold unbelievably. But they are sold in a open public auctions. $400 for laboring men, maybe a bit more for a woman who can be put in the sex trade. And this is what's happening across the country of Libya. All right? Doyle stresses that the issue shows the international community should pay more attention to post-Qaddafi Libya. There is an international responsibility to help. What is particularly important now is that the issue is reaching a global attention. Late. Again, late, because this has been going on for years. There is modern day slavery is widespread across the world, and Libya is by no means unique. It's happening in developed countries of the world as well as undeveloped countries. But what's particularly shocking is that this is happening effectively in the open, where people can go to a farmhouse, place a bid, and end up owning a human being. All right? Slavery is going on around the world. 45.8 million people in 167 countries are victims of some form of slavery today. 68% of those are subject to forced labor. Again, links to this will be in the description box below. But I had to do a video because I felt it was my duty as an informed individual, as an African American, as a Black person, as a person of color, as an activist, or as a person who cares, as an agnostic humanist, as anyone with a conscience. It was my duty to say something, to speak up, to spread information, because this is ridiculous. This is sad. This is a form of injustice. And it shows how inhumane humans can be to other humans. And again, how white supremacy is global. Racism is global. Runaway capitalism is global. Greed is global. And it also shows how history repeats itself. Because once again, the United States of America and countries in Europe, it always goes back to them. They are always the culprit. They are always the villain. And then what's crazy is how, again, the USA and European countries will somehow twist this situation and come in as the savior and be seen as, pushing great humanitarian efforts when they caused the problem to begin with. And that's what ticks me off. But I'm going to leave links to all of this in the description box below. It is really up to us to speak out and speak out about injustices and speak up or spread awareness for people who don't have the voice, who can't speak for themselves. We have to do something. The people in Libya are our brothers and sisters. The people in the Caribbean islands of Puerto Rico, those are our brothers and sisters. The people in Central America, the people in South America, the people in my hometown where I currently live, Flint, Michigan, We are brothers and sisters. We are human beings. Our lives matter. And it's up to us to speak up and speak out and make sure that we have actions behind our prayers and thoughts and our words. Because again, I see people arguing on Facebook. Well, there's no pray for Libya. There's no, pray for Puerto Rico or pray for this, pray for that. And again, as an agnostic humanist, I kind of sit back and I'm like, again, I'm not sure prayer has ever worked because y'all been praying for centuries. And again, people of color have been suffering for centuries. So again, you can pray and send positive thoughts and positive energy, but we got to have action behind our prayers and our positive thoughts. Because right now, as we speak, somebody is being sold in a public auction. So what are we going to do as conscious, aware beings that care? What are we going to do? It's time to take action steps. We can no longer sit around. So some of the action steps that we can take right now, in my opinion, you need to be spreading awareness about what's going on. We need to be contacting our own Congress folks. If you're in the United States of America, you're in the USA, we need to be contacting our own our own representatives, our congressmen and women, our Congress people. We need to be asking them, what can we do? What money can be allocated? We also need to hold Israel accountable because, again, Israel doesn't want immigrants coming to there. However, Israel is a country, if we want to call it that, because, again, they stole land from people who already lived there. Let's not forget Palestine. Let's not forget the injustice and inhumane treatments that Palestinians have been suffering for over 60 years, again, thanks to the USA and European countries. We need to be holding people accountable. We got to do something. We got to speak up. Okay? Free Libya. Free the people of Libya. End slavery. This is a worldwide issue. Speak up, speak out, act.